Welcome to the final round of Extemporaneous debate. On Wednesday morning, we began with 1,092 contestants, and we are now down to the final two. I also then want to introduce the debaters. The affirmative debater should be on your ballots. It is code S8159. He is Luke Ryan from Pembroke Hill School in Missouri. And the negative debater is code 8075, Ethan Kuruvilla from Bellevue High School in Washington. This is round 14 of Extemporaneous debate. The topic they received a little over an hour ago that's also written on the ballots, but we'll read for the audience. When in conflict, the United States should prioritize free markets over government intervention. When in conflict, the United States should prioritize free markets over government intervention. Have a great debate.
All right, can everybody hear me? Great. Judges all ready? Opponent ready? Yep. All right, then on my first word. Today, I stand in strong affirmation of the following resolution. Resolved, when in conflict, the United States should prioritize free markets over government intervention. It's for two key reasons. First is prosperity, and second is corruption. Contention one is prosperity. Government intrusion on the workings of the free market needlessly obstructs entrepreneurship, innovation, and productivity. Subpoint A is tariffs, as Emily Shamley Wright finds that consider the tumult created by Trump administration's announcement of tariffs. The uncertainty created a whiplash of on-again, off-again announcements may be just as damaging. Government intervention discourages risk-taking that could otherwise produce fruitful results. When businesses and individuals cannot confidently predict the economic environment they will operate in, they become reluctant to invest or expand. This hesitation causes stagnation. And subpoint B is regulations. George Mason University in 2016 finds that the buildup of regulations over time leads to duplicative, obsolete, conflicting, and even contradictory rules. If regulation had been held constant since 1980, the US economy would be 25% larger. And this brings me to my second contention, corruption. Specifically, government intervention leads to favoritism and bribes. The International Monetary Fund finds that much public corruption can be traced to government intervention in the economy. Individuals are willing to offer bribes to officials to circumvent the rules, and officials are tempted to accept them. A very open economy is significantly associated with lower corruption. And these issues are prevalent and harms competition. Holcomb writes in 2013 that government intervention steers economic interests towards seeking political benefits. Government often threatens to impose burdens on businesses. Cronies gain a competitive advantage. The government's ability to engage pushes everyone into the political process and forces everyone to support to those with power in exchange for nothing. In all, you're voting affirmative to protect economic growth and stop corruption. I'm now open for cross-examination.
Would you agree that free markets assume stable conditions, like rational actors, no scarcity, and full information?
I would say that in general, yeah, free markets work better in stable conditions, but if you're referring to the resolution in conflict, I would argue that in conflict refers to the two ideas conflicting with each other, not literally in conflict.
Do you believe the US won World War II because of the free market adjusting on its own, or because the government instructed protections?
I would say that that's not relevant necessarily to today's debate, but if you want to come down to it, the free market was key to innovation, which benefited the military in
How is World War II not relevant to this debate? That is the largest conflict the US has ever been in.
Again, when in conflict refers to the two ideas of free markets and government intervention being in conflict with each other, not conflict overall.
The definition of conflict is a conflict against another country.
I disagree. I would say conflict is defined as different in a way that prevents agreement for the Merriam-Webster dictionary.
You don't read a definition, I'm going to.
I can read another one in my next speech.
Okay, is everyone ready? Cool. Free markets didn't win World War II, government intervention did. We define conflict as the idea of the US military in this resolution to be having to use its military against a other power. When the US entered war, we faced a manufacturing crisis. Left to the market, companies would have kept making what was most profitable: cars, nylons, and consumer goods. But the government did not wait. It created the War Production Board and ordered companies exactly what to produce. Ford stopped making cars and began mass producing B-24 bombers once every hour at peak. General Motors built tanks, not Cadillacs, and DuPont turned stockings into parachutes. According to the US Army Center of Military History, by 1945, America had built 300,000 planes, 86,000 tanks, and 2.4 million trucks because the government took control. Historian Hugh Rockoff found that over 90% of US manufacturing during World War II was coordinated by federal planners. The War Production Board reallocated the equivalent of $3 trillion in materials. This wasn't the invisible hand. It was quotas, price controls, and supply chain redirection. We didn't wait for the market to adjust. We won by planning. But contention two is that war destroys consumer trust and only governments can restore it. Free markets depend on confidence, but war shatters that. Supply shocks raise prices, fear drives hoarding, and uncertainty kills investment. In World War II, the US created the Office of Price Administration to fight inflation and issue ration books, not to limit freedom, but to ensure fairness. The Federal Reserve confirms, without government controls, the economy would have collapsed. Even in World War I, the US had to create the Food Administration just to stop hunger and hoarding. Because markets don't deliver relief when bombs are falling. Markets don't promise stability when shelves go empty, and markets don't ensure fairness when fear takes hold. Only governments can. In war, citizens don't care about market theory. They care about food, safety, and survival. And history proves in every war we've endured, it's been the government, not markets, that's made survival possible. Thus, I'm proud to negate.
Is everyone ready? All right. Would you agree that a strong economy is key to stability?
100%.
Okay. Can you explain specifically why government intervention is uniquely key to boosting, like, for example, economic growth during conflict?
For example, in the largest conflict in US history, World War II, the government specifically directed every single company in the US to change its manufacturing to directly support the US in war. I give you the Ford example, I give you the GM example, and I give you the DuPont example.
What's your definition of in conflict? Where is that from?
The definition of conflict?
No, in conflict. Where is your definition of in conflict from?
It's the general definition of
No,
conflict.
what is the definition from? Did you cite it anywhere?
No, but you don't give any definitions.
That's fine. We'll move on. Let's talk about your first contention, or your second contention. Can you explain what your second contention exactly argues?
My second contention argues that war destroys consumer trust and only governments can restore that. What I would contend is that free markets depend on confidence and a stable economy, but that simply goes completely away when war occurs. And the only thing to stop that and fix it is government intervention. And we've seen that in the past.
All right. Is everybody ready? All right. Then let's begin. You're voting affirmative because the free market is critical to American prosperity and to stop corruption moving forward. Judges, this debate has clearly devolved into a definitional debate, but you're preferring mine because in conflict, per the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is different in a way that prevents agreement. In the conflict between government intervention and the free markets, when in conflict is the state of disagreement between those two ideas. It refers to those two ideas clashing directly with another, be it during peace or during war. It's simply referring to whether those two ideas are incompatible or compatible with each other. My opponent said that he didn't even read a definition and that his definition was just off the top of his head, but my definition is clearly from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, which you're preferring because it's preferable in today's round and in plain context is clearly what the intent of the resolutional writers was. But I'll attack his case anyways. His main argument is that government intervention is key to win wars, but corruption completely turns this, because if government officials are handing out earmarks to private companies which uniquely benefit them, that actively harms war efforts moving forward, showing how government intervention, even during war efforts, is still worse than the free market, because the free market can produce what is needed, whereas the government will use its corruption and instead influence it in undue ways. That was my IMF evidence and my Holcomb evidence in the first speech. His last argument was about how the government was key to restore consumer confidence during times of war, but that's not true, as government intervening can actively undo consumer confidence even in times of war. My first contention directly contradicts that, about how government regulations and intervention actively undermines consumer confidence. Look at the example of tariffs. Tariffs can occur in the context of wars and conflict as well, and tariffs actively undermine consumer confidence and actively harm our economy moving forward. So for all these reasons, I only see a ballot in the affirmation of today's round. Thank you.
Okay, for this speech, just going to be responding to all my opponent's arguments and then defending my own. Is everyone good? Cool. The AF gives you the Merriam-Webster's definition. Conflict is a clash of opposing ideas, but that's not what this debate is about. The topic says when in conflict. That phrase doesn't mean an ideological dispute. It means a period of national emergency, war, crisis, global upheaval. That's how this phrase is used in policy, law, and history, which I would contend this resolution is talking about. But let's go on their arguments. First, on prosperity and regulation. They say government intervention hurts innovation and growth, but in war, prosperity doesn't come from innovation. It comes from survival. In World War II, federal planning did not hurt productivity, it created it. Ford built one bomber an hour, General Motors made tanks. That's not an obstruction, that's acceleration. They try to bring up tariffs, but those are not what I'm defending. I'm not advocating clumsy peacetime trade policy. What I'm talking about is wartime production. When the stakes are life and death, the government must lead, and we saw that in World War II. But then on corruption, they tell you that the government causes corruptions, but in World War II, the complete opposite happened. The War Production Board stopped exactly that corruption, ensuring fair resource use, preventing price gouging, and making sure small businesses could contribute to the war efforts. They cite open economies reduce corruption, but ignore that war is not an open economy. In crisis, the government is not distorting competition, it's replacing chaos with coordination, and that's key in times of war. But on the rebuttal to my case, they claim that consumer confidence falls when the government intervenes, but again, history proves the exact opposite. During World War II, the Office of Price Administration boosted morale, curbed inflation, and stopped hoarding. They also say free markets will produce what's needed. That's simply false. Again, look to the largest conflict in our history, and World War II left alone, companies kept making radios, nylons, and Cadillacs. Only government orders turned them into war machines. But then go to the weighing debate. Their harms are purely speculative. Maybe the economy could have been 25% bigger, but my harms are existential. Without government planning, we lose the war. In a war economy, the goal is not to maximize GDP, it's winning, and you don't win by waiting for the market to adjust. Government intervention always is the solution in times of crisis. Thus, I negate.
All right, is everybody ready? Perfect. On my first word. The key framing issue in this debate is that if you believe my definition, it's an auto vote for the affirmative because only the affirmative has made arguments about both in peacetime and in war. Now, let's be clear. In conflict, as per the Merriam-Webster definition, is between two conflicting ideas. In fact, in past NSDA resolutions, they have used when in conflict specifically to denotate that. In fact, they have resolved. When in conflict, academic freedom in U.S. high schools ought to be valued over community standards. That when in conflict is clearly not referring to a war about academic freedom in U.S. high schools. It's referring to a conflict between the two values. It's the same thing in this debate. The when in conflict is the conflict between the free market and government intervention, the two values competing with each other. You're voting AF because of prosperity. Government intervention uniquely harms economic growth. Tariffs prevent free market entrepreneurship, and regulations worsened economic growth by 25% in the past 40 years. That's a key reason to vote AF. And second is corruption. Fewer regulations and interventions mean fewer opportunities for corruption. For every regulation that is trying to achieve something, there are 2 more regulations that simply result in political cronyism and corruption. All of my opponent's arguments are about wartime, meaning it's an auto vote for the affirmative if you believe that when in conflict refers to both in war and in peace. Moving on to directly attacking their claims, though. They argued that tariffs are not relevant to this debate, but they clearly are. That type of intervention is used both in war and in peace. Further, they said that war production stopped corruption, but that's not true. My IMF and Holcomb evidence is very specific that intervention directly leads to corruption. Furthermore, they argued that, again, government intervention was key to win wars, but that fails to counteract for my Holcomb evidence, which is clear about how corruption undermines war efforts moving forward. And their only example is World War II, but there are many other wars that have been unjustified and about how economic intervention has not benefited them. I only see an AF ballot. Thank you.
Let's start what this round is really about. The AF wants you to believe conflict just means a disagreement between ideas, but that's not what the topic says. The resolution doesn't ask about in theory. It says when in conflict, meaning when a country is in a crisis, like war, national emergency, and existential threat. That's how the phrase is used in government, law, and history, and that's why this round isn't about abstract philosophy. It's about what actually works when the stakes are highest in times of real conflict. Therefore, we should look at times when the U.S. has been in those real conflicts. Then, on prosperity and on their prosperity argument, they say regulation hurts growth, but that assumes peacetime conditions like stable markets, predictable demand, and full employment. War destroys every single one of those things. Their own evidence says the economy could have been 25% larger, but not during a war. You don't grow an economy by hoping the free market suddenly produces tanks instead of toys. We didn't win World War II by deregulating. We won because the government stepped up, took control, and restructured the economy with purpose. But then on corruption. They claim fewer regulations equals less corruption, but during war, that's exactly backward. With no oversight, private companies price gouge, hoard resources, and exploit scarcity. That goes dropped. That's why the government created ration books, fixed prices, and directed supply chains, not to restrict freedom, but to ensure fairness, coordination, and victory in times of war. That goes conceded. But then on my case, they dropped the weighing. We told you that the government regulation allowed the U.S. companies to produce 300,000 planes, 86,000 tanks, and 2.4 million trucks. That wasn't spontaneous innovation. It was planned intervention. The only reason we built the arsenal of democracy. They don't contest it. But then, more on the wing. If you like the free market, that's great. We've seen it work, but it fails in conflict, and that's what's important. If the AF wins, we get hypothetical GDP growth. But if I win, we get literal victory in World War II, the largest conflict in the United States. Only one side shows you what wins wars, and only one side proves what keeps a nation standing when everything else breaks down. For these reasons, I'm proud to negate. Good round.
Great round.
Ask the judges to complete their ballots and give it to a member of the staff. This concludes the final round of extemporaneous debate at the 2025 National Tournament. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.